the medic is treating the other guy at the same time. And he hands me a piece of gauze, and he says, "Put that over his eye, and keep talking to him, keep him awake." And so I'm trying to console this guy. He's not in pain. He is in pain, but he's more in shock than anything. He's like, "Ow,"
Yeah. Okay. You were saying something about going back to 98 a little bit?
Yeah, those were kind of difficult years personally. I was going through a divorce at that time and had custody of my daughter. And so I had to pull out of doing military affairs for a while and ended up doing stories on social services and that sort of thing. And I did that from like 98 until 9/11. Mm-hmm. And after 9/11, it's like I'm right back in military affairs.
Gotcha. I've spoken a couple times about divorce in the military and such. Did you have difficulties in your relationship having to go to other countries and almost get scooped up by guerrillas and such?
I think that had some to do with it. I mean, I was gone quite a bit during the 1980s. I was traveling quite a bit. And I think I've been to about 40 different countries and spent a lot of time away from home.
Yeah.
And I think that, like with a lot of guys in the military who spend long times on deployment where they can't take their spouses along, I think a lot of times it will lead to divorce.
Yeah.
So I think that probably had something to do with it. And it's just one of those things, facts of life, things that happen.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a running theme, obviously, and it's pretty ubiquitous talking military just in general, because lots of people have divorce stories.
Yeah.
And, I mean, several of the people that I've talked to, even just on the podcast so far, have had a divorce, if not multiple divorces. So we've talked a little bit about, what causes it, if it's the separation or if it's some people just can't handle the reality of the kind of thing, and whether not to place blame on anyone, but I'm sure, like, even for you, finding a partner who understands your mindset in that, like, the story is here. I want to be a part of the story, so that's where I need to be. And that's, I'm sure, not easy for a lot for out there to wrap their heads around that.
Yeah, in addition to the newspaper work that I'm doing, which kept me away for quite a bit, in the early 1990s, I'm starting to write books. Mm-hmm. And so that takes an incredible amount of time, the research, interviewing, transcribing tapes, and doing the actual writing of the manuscript. And so in the early 1990s, I do 3 books.
Wow.
It's kind of funny how this all developed, but they're all as told to books where I write somebody else's story. Mm-hmm. And they all come by word of mouth. And the first one was a guy I had met in Central America who had been a mercenary down there and then had been a mercenary in Burma. And he called me up one day and he said, "I want you to help me with my book." And I said, "Well, let's take a look at it and see what you got." So I went to visit him, and he hands me this huge binder. It's like 500 pages. And I start looking through it, and there are no paragraphs. It's like, it's like all one continuous
just giant, like,
flow,
run-ons.
run on sentences and all this stuff. And I'm like, well, I don't know. I'm going to have to take a look at this and see what I can do. And he says, "Well, that's only half of it." And I said, "Well, let me look at this half and see what I can get out of it." So we ended up doing a book. It's called Disposable Patriot. It was published, I think, in 92 or something like that. It's about his life as a mercenary in various parts of the world. And he was very involved in situation in Central America when I was down there, with the Sandinistas and the Contras and that sort of thing. And so we did that book, and then shortly after that, I was contacted by another guy that wanted to do his book. He had been as it turned out, he was the first American prisoner of war in Southeast Asia.
Oh, wow.
He had been captured in 1961, held by the Pathet Lao for like 18 months, most of it in solitary confinement. It was a fascinating story, and part of it was interesting because he and I and another friend of his went to Laos to try to find the place where he had been held captive. And we spent about probably 2 weeks over there. Really interesting trip. And the trip helped me get inside his head.
Yeah.
So I was able to write the book in his voice about what he went through during those 18 months he had been held in solitary confinement. And then shortly after that, I was contacted by another guy who had been special operations during the Korean War, which I knew absolutely nothing about. So I ended up doing a book with him about, he had been with a guerrilla unit that operated behind the lines in North Korea, which I didn't know existed at that time. Ended up going to Carlisle, looking through the records up there of this very secretive, clandestine organization. We got a bunch of stuff declassified. So I'm writing these two books at the same time I'm doing military affairs for the newspaper. Ended up getting both of them published. It was kind of interesting. I got the word that the publisher was going to do both these books while I'm in Bosnia reporting over there. So anyway, a lot of my time during this time, I'm writing books, I'm writing for the newspaper, I'm traveling, and so a lot of this had an impact on the marriage, obviously.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to maintain a relationship that maybe there's a better way to put it, you don't really have time for, if that makes sense, because if you're such a busy guy, or some of the people, just so busy people, and if you don't have the ability to set aside that time to focus on the relationship a little bit, you get
so wrapped up in your career and what you're doing, and you tend to think that the other person is always going to be there, and you don't pay enough attention, or as much attention as you should.
Well, that's where the proper communication, you would hope, would come into play, and they would let you know, like, hey, I'm feeling this way.
Yeah.
But it takes it's not easy, because I know there's a lot of discourse online these days about the career versus family life and stuff, and the people that do both, and it's like just understanding to do both is hard. It takes a lot. Even in just trying to do this, I'm very fortunate that my wife works with me on trying to do this thing. But it's time consuming, and and I never want to have to pick one or the other, so I do my best to try to balance them both, but it's like the
balancing act is tough, especially when you're younger, if you have a young family like you do. My kids are all grown now, so it's not the same thing, but it's still a matter of, with my wife now, it's balancing her work, because she's very busy, and with what I'm doing now also.
Yeah, that definitely takes some work.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of understanding for each person to understand what the other's doing.
Yeah.
And the amount of time that it takes for them to devote to their jobs or whatever other pursuits that they have.
Yeah, and you want to allow that person that opportunity to do that because you love them, and you want them to be able to do the things that they want to do. But like every once in a while, it's like, hey, you should come home. Like, I want you here for a little while. Yeah. So when did the divorce happen? You might have told me, and I forgot.
No, I'm trying to remember exactly when it happened. I can't remember. It was 96 or 98 or somewhere around in there.
So before kind of in between some of the more crazy stuff before the potential legal troubles with 98 and all that, but after Desert Storm kind of stuff.
Yeah, it was. It was in the late '90s at some point, and it dragged on for a little while. I know, but we were separated for a while we were going through the divorce and that sort of thing. And what's interesting about it is that as I was doing social services, is how I met my current wife. Who's been married for 20 years now. Just celebrated our 20th anniversary.
Well, congratulations!
Thank you. But it was another one of those serendipitous things that I was. I was looking to do a story on kids who had troubled kids who had gone through state-sponsored programs successfully and had done something with their lives. And so I had a contact with one of the agencies that worked with the state that dealt with troubled kids, and I asked them, who would be a good candidate for this, and she gave me the name of a young man who had been through one of their programs and was about to go into the Army, and so she said you might want to contact his mother and see if she'd agreed to talk to you. So I called her up, and we got into a conversation, and my divorce was not final yet. She had been divorced also, but we just got to talking, and she gave me permission to go interviewed her son, and then we continued to talk over the phone for about 6 months, and it was about 7 or 8 months, I guess, something like that. And then we finally agreed to meet, and we met. Our families met, actually. I had my daughter with me. She had her mother with her and both her kids with her and stuff. And it was just like we were sort of meant to be together, and we've been together ever since.
Yeah, well, that's great. That I'm happy you were able to find that.
Yeah.
And I've had a few conversations with some other people where it's, I'm in a similar situation, try not to look at things necessarily as like a failed marriage, but it was more of just like that was just one chapter along the road that led me to the place you were supposed to be, kind of thing.
Yeah. So, yeah, and Mary, my wife now, is very understanding of what I want to do, and she is. She has her job, and is very good at what she does, and so we try to complement each other as much as possible in dealing with family issues and household issues and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, well, she's letting us sit down and do this too, so thank you very much for that. So when it comes to 9/11, and you guys scrambled to get stuff together. And then you eventually started going over yourself, correct, to Iraq and Afghanistan and all that?
I went to initially to Kuwait.
To Kuwait, okay.
This was before we went into Iraq. I had been to Iraq briefly during Desert Storm. It was Desert Storm. Just inside the border for a while, stayed there, and it's like, okay, war's over, let's go home kind of thing. This time, everybody ended up going to Kuwait first.
Because it all funneled through Kuwait up to
everybody had to go to Kuwait in order to get into the queue for the pools. And I knew, again, that I wanted to be with the unit from Georgia. And so the 3rd Infantry Division, which had been redesignated from the 24th Infantry Division at Fort Stewart, knew they were going to be in there. They were going to play a major role. I mean, I had this sense about it. And it was like, so I did. I don't remember exactly how this all worked out, but I think, again, I broke the pool system, and I got out with the 3rd Infantry Division.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that again, because it's one of those where, not that there's anything wrong with the pool system and trying to be fair to everyone, but I've had the discussion with people at certain jobs, like, when it comes to loyalty to the company and how some people feel like that just automatically qualifies them for certain things. And it's like, obviously longevity and loyalty isn't something that shouldn't be considered, but at the same time, I don't care if you've been there for 20 years, if you're not the best person to handle this specific job, I feel like it should go to that person. If you're thinking about it like handling things effectively and doing the best. So like in your specific situation, don't try to look at it as a kind of you're breaking the system or there's some kind of favoritism, but it's like it makes sense to send someone like you who has those contacts, who has that know-how. Maybe if you had brought along like someone else within that pool to help them learn it or do something like that. But it's also one of those, it's like, hey man, just because like you're here and you're next in the line doesn't mean that you necessarily would have done that very well compared with someone else. You know what I mean? So it's like, I just feel like there are more things to be considered when trying to make those kind of decisions.
I think that there was a certain amount of understanding that they wanted to put people with military organizations where they would get the best coverage in terms of, I mean, again, it was more like being with the Atlanta newspapers, 3rd Infantry Division, which had units at both Fort Stewart and Fort Benning, would, our readership would benefit by having somebody cover those units rather than, say, somebody from a newspaper in California that,
Well, there's something to be said, too, about like your experience, you being in the military, because a lot of reporters, I'm sure, show up and people don't want to talk to them. You know, whereas you come in and you haven't had been a Marine, you like I say, you spoke the language. You're like, hey, I get it. People open up a little bit. They're a little more comfortable with expressing themselves with you. So you're able to get, I don't want to say but you're able to get more information.
People are a little more open.
Yeah.
I don't want to say they're less guarded, but they're more willing to talk to you if they know you've been through some of the same experiences that they've been through, or you've been even through more experiences than they have. And I'm an older guy. I mean, at this time, I'm like 55, 56 years old, and I'm dealing with kids who, in their early 20s, mid-20s at the latest, even, company commanders are late 20s probably. So I'm like grandfather to them, so it's like, but they also respected the fact that I was in fairly decent shape. And so here's this old guy out here living in the desert with us and going through all the same stuff that we're going through. So there's a certain amount of respect that builds up that, and because I've seen other reporters go out to units totally ill prepared for what they're supposed to do. And the guys, whether it's military or whether it's Army or Marines or whatever, they look at these people and say, I'm not going to deal with that guy because they're not prepared. I mean, I was always prepared. I'd help preparing. Lloyd helped me prepare. I knew enough to prepare myself. And so they respected that, and they respected the fact that I had been to a lot of different places, knew a lot of different things, had been through a lot of different experiences, had been shot at before, had done crazy things. And so it was something that, it's like, okay, we can accept this guy, we can talk to him, and we know he's not going to screw us. He's not going to make up stuff, make us look bad. Yeah,
exactly. That shared experience that I'm trying to remember. It fails me now. We talk about movies a lot on this, but one of the military movies where they sent everyone to a shortened basic training, and I want to say it was only like 4 weeks long or something, but you can feel it in the movie because no military movie is perfect. And I know a lot of Army guys and stuff, they hate watching Army movies because they just point out all the mistakes the whole time. It can't separate themselves from it and just enjoy the movie.
Yeah.
But there have been some, and it's like you can feel when the actors had went through that, because you're like, okay, like they don't have this exact same thing, but it's like they put in the effort to at least try to get it, to try to understand, to be on at least the same page a little bit, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think that there are certain, I guess, producers or directors or whoever they are, whoever's putting the movie together, that hire people to put people through that, like in the movie Platoon.
That's it. It was Platoon. Yeah.
Well, the guy that they hired to put those guys through a boot camp in the Philippines was Dale Dye. Dale's a former Marine. And he has a business where he does that sort of thing. And I mean, he's been in a number of movies himself. I mean, he's been in, he was in The Longest Day. He was one of the officers in that. He was in several of the Steven Seagal movies where he plays a Navy officer and stuff. And anyway, just as an aside, Dale and I shared a few beers many, many years ago. I went to a Soldier of Fortune convention in Las Vegas back in the early 1980s as I was preparing to go to Central America. And Dale was working for Soldier of Fortune magazine at the time. He was one of their editors, I think. And I ran into him in the bar. I didn't know who he was at the time, but we got to talking, shared Marine experience and that thing, shared a couple of beers, and I've always remembered that. And then I see him later. He does the training for these guys in Platoon, takes them to the Philippines, puts them essentially through a boot camp, and so the scenes in Platoon are very realistic.
Yeah.
He did the same thing. He was also the trainer in Forrest Gump.
Okay. Gotcha.
He did the military training for the guys in Forrest Gump. But yeah, I mean, I think that there are certain movies that you see that these guys have no idea what they're doing when it comes to the military, where there are other movies, this is very realistic sort of thing. Like, Saving Private Ryan is one of those movies. I don't know how much Dale was involved in the training during that time, but that was pretty realistic too.
Yeah, for sure. So can you tell us a little bit about your time, a little more about being with those guys in Iraq?
Sure. I mean, that was probably my experience with the military. Probably as close as I've come to being killed.
Well, what's the phrase that you've said a bunch of times about had to get out of the military?
Oh, yeah. I had to get out of the Marine Corps in order to go to war.
Yeah.
So I've, Desert Shield, Desert Storm, there were guys who were in close combat. Yeah. I mean, the unit that I was with, we were that unit that did the big left hook into Iraq, part of that. And it just, I did not see a lot of it. Operation Iraqi Freedom was completely different. I was with a tank company. It's part of the 3rd Infantry Division, 1st Battalion, 64th Armor. A great commanding officer who accepted me. It's like, even though I'm part of the media, he and I got to know each other, and he knew I was a Marine and that. And,
yeah.
So I'm embedded with the unit. We've got several embeds with the unit, but I'm with the unit, and also a photographer from the Journal-Constitution is there too, Brent Sanderlin. So we get assigned essentially to a tank company, Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 64th Infantry Regiment, and we spent some time with these guys in Kuwait, and the war opens, and we're with them, and we're sort of like the tail end. Charlie Company's like the tail end of it. And the first real contact that we've got is several days into the war. and there's a town called Najaf, and where a sandstorm had kicked up, and it could hardly see anything, but everything was red. There was this red hue, and anyway, there was 2 battalions, or I guess it was 2 companies, mixed tank infantry companies, had gone ahead of us through this intersection. And Charlie Company's role was to hold that intersection, defend that intersection, because there was indications that there were Iraqi army units going to come from some direction or another. And as these 2 previous companies before us had gone through, I mean, they had just knocked buses and cars off the roads. There were civilians all over the place. There were wounded, injured, and that sort of thing. And so they pull into the intersection in the middle of a sandstorm here, and they start taking some of these wounded Iraqi civilians into some of the vehicles. I'm in the First Sergeant's 113, the armored personnel carrier, and so First Sergeant says to me, he says, "Ron, get out of the vehicle. You know, we've got some people coming in. Want you in the back of the vehicle after they get in." And so I get out of the vehicle, and as I'm getting out of the vehicle, I can't remember. I guess it was the driver had left his M16 in the back there, and the immediate thought in my mind: we got civilians coming in here. We've got a loose M16 here. So I grab the M16 and I take it with me. Now I'm supposed to be a non-combatant.
Yeah.
I'm not supposed to be carrying a weapon of any sort on the battlefield.
Maybe committing a war crime right now.
So I get out of the vehicle, and all of a sudden somebody says, "We've got 2 people coming down the road here. We don't know if they're armed or not." And so I jump. They've got trenches that are dug around here because there had been, I guess, guys there defending that particular intersection. So I jump in a trench with my M16 now, and there's one other guy that's there with me, and we're looking for these 2 guys that are supposed to be walking down the road. They don't know. And so I'm, if these guys are armed and it looks like they're going to shoot, I'm going to shoot them. And so it turns out that there are 2 guys that just wandered into the intersection, and so it's no big deal. So I end up giving the M16 back. There were a couple of incidents as this is all going on too. There's one of the tank crew is tending to a guy who had been injured in the wreck or something like that, and he's got a bag of fluid that he's putting in because the guy. And he says to me, he says, "Ron, can you hold this?" Because he says, I gotta go do something else. So I go over there, and this is after I give my M16 back, and I'm holding this bag of fluid, and I'm talking to the guy, and the guy says, "I don't want to die. I've got 2 kids." It's very broken English. The guy's Iraqi, and so I'm holding the bag, and then it's like, well, we're going to take him back to the hospital, but it's back here. So can you go with him? And so they put the guy on top of the 113. I'm holding the bag. They strap the guy down, and I'm holding on to something and holding the bag on the top of this 113 that's going down through the desert there. They get the guy there, and as far as I know, the guy lives. I mean, because I don't think he was injured that badly. So it's like all of a sudden I'm a part of all this. I'm not just sitting back and watching. They're expecting me to be a part of what's going on and to help out wherever I can. And I don't feel that I can, just because I'm a reporter, I can't say, I can't do this, I'm a non-combatant kind of thing. And I think that earned me a lot of respect from those guys, too, the fact that I was able to do something, especially helping out with the injured guy.
Yeah.
That it gave them an opportunity to go what they had to do militarily, where this was not necessarily something, they could have let the guy die or bleed out or whatever was going on with this guy. And so the fact that I helped out, I think, helped solidify my position with them and help me win their confidence a lot more. Even though, I was pretty well ingrained in the unit by then anyway.
I'm surprised you didn't earn a nickname or something from that moment.
No. I was just always Ron.
Yeah.
That was it.
Well, yeah, I'm sure that contributed quite a bit.
No, but there were some other incidents later on, that from then on it was like,
just another brother
guy.
there.
I was just another guy.
Yeah, it only took 30 some odd years to get there.
Yeah,
that's incredible.
Yeah. So then, as we're driving up into Iraq toward Baghdad, there are little firefights here and there, and that sort of thing. And I'm still in the First Sergeant's 113. I'm trying to remember, there weren't any real major incidents. There are a couple of skirmishes here and there. But then we get to the point where they decide that they're going to run the battalion into Baghdad and clear a path to the airport.
Okay.
This becomes what became known as the Thunder Run. And so, again, they use this particular battalion, and the first two companies in line are mixed tanks, mechanized infantry. The trail company is Charlie Company, which is tank company, which I'm with. The First Sergeant's 113 is about, 3 or 4 vehicles from the end of the convoy. We've got I think it was a Bradley that was the last vehicle in line, and I think it was the Battalion XO was in that vehicle. Mm-hmm. So we're going down the highway into Baghdad, and the first thing I remember happening is there's an RPG comes out of somewhere and hits one of the tanks that's just ahead of us, and it causes a fire in the engine compartment, and the tank's dead in the road there. And we had just gone under an overpass, and there are guys up on the overpass that start shooting at us. And of course, everybody starts shooting back at them, and it's like guys are running around trying to put the fire out. They're getting water, these 5-gallon water cans from various vehicles, pouring it on the fire. It's doing no good. I can remember the Battalion XO taking water jugs and slinging them along the road, and they're skidding down the road, and I'm getting out of the 113, and I'm getting water jugs and helping to to lift them up and get to these guys so they can. So anyway, they were there for a while, and after a while, the firing from the Iraqis dies down. They chase them off or something like that, but they can't move the tank. The tank is dead in the road. So we're going to abandon the tank, and they start to take all the equipment out of the tank, all the weapons, all the ammunition, anything of any use.
Because they got to render it useless so the enemy can't.
Yeah, and so the idea is that they're going to the Air Force is going to come in and bomb that tank, kill that tank so that nobody can use it again. Yeah. So most of the junk or the gear that they take out of it, they put into the First Sergeant's 113. So previously we were able to close the hatch in the back. Well, we can't close it anymore, and we can't. So it's like, it's halfway up, and so we've got to stand up in the back of the 113, and 2 of the guys from the tank are in there with us. I'm in there. There's a medic in there also. The First Sergeant's in there, and the driver's in there. So we've got like 2, 4, 5 of us in the back. First sergeant's, he's on the 50 cal, which is up there. They got the driver. And so the 5 of us in the back, and as we're driving we're going into Baghdad, and, everybody opening fire on us. And, we've got rounds pinging off the road. The Iraqis are terrible shots. But got rounds pinging off the side, and we basically no place to duck down because of all this equipment in here. And one of the tank crewmen that had come in from the disabled tank, he hands me his 9mm. He says, "Ron, look out the back. Make sure nobody comes up the back." So I'm hanging out the back of the 113 with the 9mm, looking for people. And these guys, they're firing away, and people are firing at us. And all of a sudden, the guy who gives me his 9mm, I hear him go, "Ow!" And I look over to him, and he's like, "I've been hit." And so he gets, I'm not sure where the bullet came from, but anyway, he has a sucking chest wound.
Oh, wow.
And the medic starts to work on him. And about that time, there's another guy who had been firing out the front, and he's looking out the front of, he's standing up there. He takes a round. It comes in through his head right here, takes out his right eye, goes out the side of his head, and he falls back on me. And it's like the medic is treating the other guy at the same time, and he hands me a piece of gauze, and he says, put that over his eye and keep talking to him, keep him awake. And so I'm trying to console this guy. He's not in pain. He is in pain, but he's more in shock than anything. He's like, "Ow,"
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to talk to him. So we've got these 2 pretty severely wounded guys in the vehicle, and the medic, he's doing an amazing job because he's trying to keep this guy from drowning the other guy from drowning in his own blood, because he's got this sucking chest wound. The guy can't breathe, and he's got blood all over the place. And, we've got a guy with a head wound whose eye has come out. And so the medic is finally able, he tears open an MRE and takes the plastic MRE and puts it down over the sucking chest wound. And tapes it up as best he could, and then he comes over and starts working on the other guy to help him. And he tells the first sergeant, "We got to get to the airport as fast as we can." And so, I'm back there, and I'm sort of basically, I'm laying back here. I'm trapped because one guy with the head wound is laying on top of me, and the other guy's over here on my right side. And so it seems like forever until we get to the airport. And meantime, I don't know what's going on until much later. I see the video of this, but they're blowing up cars and vehicles and stuff all along the way as we're going to the airport here.
Wow.
So finally get to the airport, and they're able to get these 2 guys, they medevac both these guys. Both of them lived.
Wow.
And I've met both of them over the years since then. Yeah. So, whether I helped or not, I don't know. But that's, I tell people that, I wrote a piece after that about, if those 2 guys had not been there, I probably would have taken at least one, if not both of those rounds that hit those guys, just because of the way that they were angled, because I was standing right behind the guy that got shot in the head. But the fact that he survived is just amazing to me, because it just, that round came in at an angle, and it just took out, right through his forehead and took out his right.
Luckily it didn't go more inside the skull. And
it was amazing.
That's wild. And all the time, here you were a clerk for the Marines. 30 years later, now you're a reporter in the middle of a war zone and seeing more than a lot of even infantrymen would see, especially right now where there's not as much conflict, at least that we're involved in at the moment. That's crazy.
Yeah, and I think about how lucky I was, and just to be fortunate to have survived that. But I also think about how quickly the medic responded to that. His name was Sean Sullivan. Never forget the kid. He was great. I mean, he was very calm. He knew exactly what he was doing. I mean, he was mad because his medical bag they dumped all this other crap on top of his medical because he couldn't get any, so he had to improvise. And so, like taking that MRE wrapper and putting it over that sucking chest wound, and then telling me to take that gauze and just put it over his eye and don't just let it sit there. Don't press on it or anything. Yeah. I mean, just the presence of mind that he had to deal with those two things so quickly, and they're probably things that he had never dealt with before.
I was going to ask that if he had much experience or if he was brand fresh too.
Well, he wasn't. I mean, I don't think he had experienced that kind of combat injuries before. I'm sure he had dealt with injuries before.
Yeah.
But to have two such grievous injuries in such a short period of time and being able to deal with them without flipping out, without the emotion, it was like he did what he was trained to do.
Yeah.
And he did it with professionalism, and there was no panic whatsoever about him. He was swearing about the fact that he was pissed because he couldn't get to his medical bag, but he did what he had to do to save those guys' lives.
Just turned it on and made it happen.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So, I mean, after that, for the most part, the unit that I was with, things calmed down quite a bit, and took residence in one of the hotels there, and I think it was a hotel or some sort of ministry or something in Baghdad, and we thought things would pretty much calm down, and they did for a little while.
Yeah.
I mean, we even went out. We were out in the streets. We were talking to the Iraqis. Iraqis were thanking us, and then I think the photographer Brant and I left. Probably 2 weeks maybe after we had gotten to Baghdad, came home.
Wow.
And then things went all to hell. We went back again when the unit was preparing to come home, and they had gone. I can't remember exactly where they were, but they had moved north of Baghdad and had taken over, had taken a position up in one of the cities up north of Baghdad, and I can't remember the name of it now, but it was a place that the Marines later had some major fights in that city, and I can't remember now which one it was, but I mean it was pretty peaceful when we were there.
Yeah.
Then came home with the unit, flew back with them, and went through the whole ceremony at Fort Stewart and all of that, and so.
And you were there just to general reporting on the war, that unit, what was going on, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, when they think about reporting on a war, they think more about a big picture. Mm-hmm. But when you're down with a unit, a company size unit or whatever, I mean, you get a very small view of the war. It's like a pinhole view of what's going on. You don't have a real sense of what else is going on in the rest of the war. I mean, I had some access to the internet and to news of things that was going on, but it was not my job to report on the overall war. That was somebody else's job. That was people back at the paper to report on the big issues related to the war. My job was to report on what was going on in that particular unit at any particular moment. To write more of the human interest kinds of things.
Yeah.
This is
their stories.
This is what their stories are. This is what these soldiers are going through on an individual level or on a company level or whatever the case may be. I mean, I wasn't dealing with the grand big issue.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I think a lot of readers misunderstand about that kind of thing, because I was accused of all sorts of things. You're not seeing the big picture. Of course I'm not seeing the big picture. I'm stuck down here company level looking for a decent toilet that I can take a crap in.
Yeah.
But those are the sort of things you just kind of, they come with the territory and you kind of brush it off and you say, that wasn't my job to report on the big picture of the war, whether it was right or whether it was wrong. But this is what they sent these soldiers to do, and I'm reporting on what these soldiers did at any particular moment.
Yeah. There are definitely times where you have to learn to just tune out the chaff and just focus on task at hand.
Yeah. And I mean, and that's what I pretty much learned to do over the years is to I mean, it's not that you tune it out completely. I mean, I listen to this kind of stuff. Some of it I laugh at, and some of it I'm like, well, they might have a point about this or that. But for the most part, when people accuse me of not seeing the big picture, it's like, of course I'm not seeing the big picture, dumbass. I'm down at this, I'm down here. I don't have access to the big picture.
Yeah.
But no, when this happened, I was 55 years old. I mean, and significantly older than most of these kids that were doing this. And I think that I earned their respect for the fact that I was able to keep up with them. I did not sensationalize what they were doing. Did not do it for my own glorification, but tried to report honestly on what they were doing and what they were going through to give our reading public, the people that read what I wrote, some idea about what these soldiers were going through at that particular time.
Well, I think it's very cool that you were doing that.
Mm. So, and from what I've been told, I haven't seen this, that my coverage was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize.
How do you not know if your own stuff was not nominated?
I don't know. I didn't nominate myself.
Yeah. You would think someone would call you up and be like, "Hey, just to let you know."
Well, I think the paper sent it in. Now, how much it was considered, I don't know. But I mean, it sounds good.
That's one of those things where I would hope that, if someone had put me in for an award or something, just be like, "Hey, man, just to let you know, I put you in for this."
Yeah, I think it was submitted, but I don't know.
No.
I didn't get it, but I think they submitted it for breaking news or something like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, the experience itself was worth it. I mean, it's one of those things that was one of the more exciting times in my life. And a lot of people ask, "Weren't you scared?" And I don't know, maybe I'm stupid or something, or maybe there's some gene in me. When I'm doing something like that, it doesn't matter what, I don't have that sense of fear. I have a sense of heightened awareness. And it's like all my senses are attuned. It's like one of the incidents that we didn't talk about earlier, when I was doing this series on the international drug trade. Probably the most dangerous thing that we did during that time was managed to get in to see the guy who was considered at that time the kingpin of the heroin trade in Southeast Asia. Mm-hmm. He was a guy by the name of Kun Sa. part Chinese, part Burmese, had a rebel army that was fighting not only the army in Burma, but was responsible for, at that particular time, I think it was like roughly 75% of the world's heroin.
Yeah.
And so his claim was that he was in the heroin trade only because it was the only means available for him to fight against the army of Burma.
Gotcha.
And the whole premise of this series was trying to point out to people how illegal drugs fuel certain wars and insurgencies around the world. Mm-hmm. And so getting to meet him was like that was kind of one of the ultimate things, because he was very aware of public relations. I mean, he wanted to be seen as a guy who was a patriot for his country. So anyway, it took a great deal of negotiations with a number of different people. And Lloyd, my friend Lloyd, was with me on this trip. And so we ended up in a hotel in northern Thailand for about a week. And I remember we're there and we get a phone call, or I get a phone call at some point and said, if you're still willing to meet the man up north. They referred to him as the man up north. They wouldn't refer to him by his name over the telephone. Said,
got to speak in codes a little bit.
There'll be a man who will meet you at the pool at this hotel at such and such a time. So we met this guy at the pool, and he said, if you want to meet the man up north, and said, go to this particular place. And it was a reclining Buddha in the town of so-and-so, and someone will meet you there. So Lloyd and I, we go to this, I can't remember, we had to fly in or drive in or something to this place, reclining Buddha, a big, huge Buddha. And we've got some gear with us, for a backpack, with enough stuff for a few days. Mm-hmm. And we're there, and these guys, 3 guys in a truck, drive up, motion us to get in the truck. They speak no English, but they know who we are.
Yeah.
And they motion us to get in the truck. So it's like we're okay.
Another moment of, am I going to get in this vehicle and come back?
But again, it was one of those things. Weren't you afraid? It's like, no. I mean, it's like, this is adventure. This is what I signed up for. All my senses are heightened. So they take us to this village out in the middle of nowhere, and they take us to a little shed. It's a little room off of a bigger shed, and all these guys in there, and they're Thai, they're Lao, they're Burmese, and who knows what else. Nobody speaks any English. Mm-hmm. It's all motions, this, that, and the other. And they tell Lloyd and I to go in here to give us some rice to eat. And it's like they get motions like, tomorrow, basically, you go over the mountains to meet the man up north. So we try to sleep, and there are a bunch of guys out there, they're drinking around a fire and making all kinds of racket. And we finally doze off. In the middle of the night, we hear this incredible scream. And we both jump up, are they killing somebody or what's going on? And we kind of sneak out the door and look around, and they just butchered a pig. It's like, okay, let's try to get back to sleep. Yeah. And so anyway, they wake us up before dawn the next morning to lead us out. He's got this whole team of mountain ponies, little mountain ponies. I mean, it's like only slightly larger than Shetland ponies, and mules with packs on them, motion us to get up on these mountain ponies. Got 2 guides, neither of which speak English, and off we go into the mountains. And so we're going up the these little mountain trails, and these little ponies know what they're doing. They're going pretty well. And at one point, I'm ahead of Lloyd. He's like 2 or 3 horses behind me, and all of a sudden I hear this horse whinnying, and I hear this thud, and look back, and Lloyd's laying on the ground. A cobra had spooked this horse and threw Lloyd.
Wow.
And he landed on his elbow and really screwed up his elbow. Keep going, and he's hurting like crazy. And we get to a stopping point where we stop for lunch, and our 2 guides, they break out the big bamboo pipes to smoke opium. And they had been dragging, but now they offer us hits of the pipe. We decline. Keep going up the mountain, and at one point we pass this fortification, and there's a guy there with a walkie-talkie. And he starts talking into the walkie-talkie and just kind of motions us through. They know we're coming. So we start out before dark, and as it gets dark, Lloyd had taken my pony because his can't carry him. There are no more ponies, so I'm walking, and I'm starting to fall behind these people. It's getting dark. We're walking through. It's more like a pine forest than a jungle. And they get so far ahead of me, I can't see them. And I'm like, Lloyd, yell so I can follow your voice and keep going. And so eventually we get to the crest of this hill. I catch up with him. We go down the hill. At the bottom of the hill, there are a couple of Jeeps waiting for us. In addition to that, there are all these kid soldiers there. And somehow they have rigged up a TV. They're watching a TV, and they're watching American wrestling on TV. It was the most bizarre thing. I mean, to me, it's like, am I in a dream? Is this
Definitely
real?
Didn't expect that.
Yeah. And I'm exhausted, and he's hurting, and it's like, so they take us to this little hut. They give us, well, actually, before we leave, they give us some warm tea to drink, and it sort of refreshes us a little bit, and they take us to this hut and, in the middle of this village, and the next day we go and sit down with Kun Sa, the guy who's responsible for all of this heroin. And he takes us on a tour of the villages, and he's explaining through his interpreter how he's like a patriot. And he's, the only reason he's in the heroin business is because, that's the only business that he can make money in order to fight the Burmese army. And so we spend 2 days in that camp. And they're very nice to us, very gracious, feed us, give us water, don't feel threatened at all.
Wow.
And so when it's time to leave, they pack us into a truck, and we drive. Instead of having to take, because I'm afraid we're going to have to take those damn donkeys and horses over the mountains again to get home. But they pack us in a truck and drive us to a certain point near the border. And as we get there, they tell us to get out. And they take us through the jungle, down this stream, past the border guards. Mm-hmm. Because, we did not get any stamps at our passports going in. Yeah. And so the Thai border guards are not going to be very nice to us going out if American passport. So they take us past the border guards, and as we're going down this stream, I slip on a rock and really sprain my ankle badly. And so I'm hobbling along, and it's just, Lloyd's hurting, I'm hurting, and we finally make it to a hotel, and it's like, did we really do that?
Yeah.
Did we survive?
Did that just happen?
But it's another one of those things where when I tell people that story, and I usually don't go into all that detail on it, but it's like, weren't you scared? And I'm like, I don't know. There must be something strange about me that I'm just, when I do those sorts of things, there's this heightened sense of, I feel like I'm doing the right thing. I feel, and I just have this great sense of awareness about everything that's going on around me. And It's not so much being scared as it is being, being enervated, being excited about it.
Well, it's funny, like my kid asks me if, she's very young. She asked me if I was scared of being in the Army, and I try to explain to her, it was like, yeah, I mean, of course there are things that are scary, but the whole definition of like courage is not that it's the absence of fear, but the ability to still go on in the presence of fear, and in some of those moments, like, yeah, I mean, I had scary moments, of course, but for the most part, it's like I didn't have time to be scared, like still have, like we've said many times, like, stuff's happening, where there are things that need to be done. So, I'll be scared later.
Yeah.
We got to get this done right now.
I think a lot of fear is more anticipation of what might happen than it is as you're doing things of things that might happen. Because when you're in the moment of doing something, I don't think you think about things that might happen. You're more focused on doing what you're supposed to do at that particular moment. It's the anticipation, it's the building up to it. Because like with almost everything that I've ever done in the reporting business, especially going into war zones, there was always this anticipation of, well, this could happen or that could happen. What if this happens? What if that happens? And so it's like you can drive yourself crazy, and you could drive yourself, or you can convince yourself not to do it because of what might happen. So it's getting over that hurdle of thinking about what could happen before you actually do something. That once you get past that, at least for me, it's like I'm more focused now on getting this done than I am on being afraid of what might happen.
No, it's very true. Like when I was flying into the desert, it was much more so as we're in the plane, especially we got closer and closer to landing in Kuwait or getting off a C-130 in Iraq. It's like you look out the window and you can kind of see like, oh man, this is getting real. Like I'm showing up. Like you said, you're in your head and you're thinking like, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? Blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But then as soon as them doors open and it's like, get the off the plane, and you get off and you grab your stuff and you're moving here and you're going there. It's like, I don't have time to be scared.
Yeah.
I got to go. And it totally changes once you're right there, unless, you just break down and then.
And then just curl up into a ball and
just don't do anything.
Don't do anything.
But for the most part, it's like, you don't have time to think about it. It's time to go.
Yeah, I've had guys tell me that after that, during that incident where the tank got hit, and I'm out there on the road with the water canisters, and guys who were there asked me, didn't you worry about the rounds that were going off around you? They were pinging off the road. And I never noticed them, but I didn't. I mean, people tell me that there were rounds going off, and I don't know. I was more intent on getting those water jugs to the fire than anything. So
we'll be going for a little while now, and we're almost at 3 hours in the second half, and I feel like you still have more story to tell, but we could probably do a little more of this again later if you'd be willing to.
I'd have to think about some of the other things, but I mean, we've covered a number of things. I haven't gone into much detail about any of the books that I've done.
Well, if you wanted to, as kind of maybe just a wrap up, give a little, I guess, ending synopsis a little bit about some of the other, all the books that you've done and things like that.
Okay. Well, I mentioned several of the books earlier. Disposable Patriot was the first book I did with Jack Terrell. Jack passed away a few years ago. But it's kind of an interesting look at the American involvement in Central America in the early 1980s and Jack's experiences as a mercenary in not only there but also in Burma. I ran into him again in Burma. And then the second book I did, Solitary Survivor, with Colonel Lawrence Bailey. He was the first documented POW in Southeast Asia, and held captive in Laos, solitary confinement for about 17 months. And it's kind of an interesting story in how he was able mentally to get himself through that, because his solitary confinement was in a room that had no light.
Wow.
I mean, he was in the dark for most of the 17 months. And the only light he had, there was a little like pinhole or small hole in some of the metal that was covering one of the windows, and he had been badly injured. As a matter of fact, this is another one of those very serendipitous things. He had been a passenger in an aircraft that was flying from Vientiane, Laos to Saigon when it was hit by an enemy, it was an RPG or some sort of missile or something like that, Pathet Lao fired. He was the only one, and Bob was a pilot, but he was a passenger in this plane. He was the only one in that aircraft who was actually wearing a parachute, because they had one parachute. There was a strap-on parachute that you had to put on. The other ones were parachutes that you could take off and buckle on. Okay. I'm not that familiar with parachutes. We explain it more in the book. But he was actually had the parachute on. Plane got hit. Wing fell off. Plane starts to roll over as Bob gets up, manages to get to the door. And as he goes out the door, the tail of the aircraft hits him in the, I can't remember, it's either the left or right arm, breaks that arm, so he has no control over that arm. He's still able to pull the ripcord on his parachute. He is able to come down, to land safely. The rest of the crew of the aircraft go down with the aircraft, wow. And all of them, their bodies eventually were recovered because the Pathet Lao buried them, and then years later they went back. But the most interesting part of Bob's story was that 17 months he was in confinement and trying to get out of him. What was that experience like? What did you have to do mentally to get you through that period when you could have very easily given up, gone insane, done something, and you came out of it a better man?
Yeah.
And so that was pretty interesting. And then the next book I did was called White Tigers. This was a guy, young lieutenant from Georgia, sent to Korea, sent to be the head of to run a guerrilla outfit that operated behind the lines in North Korea. So he was the only American in a guerrilla unit of North Koreans who had defected to the South, and he took them behind the lines. They ran raids, they did assassinations, they robbed banks. Fascinating wow. story about what he did. And then the next book I did was I did it with the company commander of the unit that I'd been with in Iraq, and it's called Heavy Metal, about the tank company's battle to Baghdad. So those are 4 of the 6 books that I've done. I think those are the most exciting most interesting of the books. Anybody who's interested in military history or international security affairs, that sort of thing.
Gotcha. Yeah, well, I certainly hope people check them out, and I'm gonna.
Well, so do I. They're all available on Amazon.com.
Okay. And maybe one day I'll convince you to see if we can get them on Audible or something. I like listen to them because they suck at reading. But unless there's anything else you would like to end on today. No,
I just appreciate you taking the time to listen to my stories, and because, and hopefully that someday my only granddaughter, will have an opportunity to listen to these and say, yeah, my grandpa, did some interesting things in his life.
Well, thank you for sharing them with me.
Thanks, Alex.